Era Mitchell walked through the doors of Henderson Community College with her head held high, but her heart was racing. At 23, she was older than most of the other students, and she knew she looked different too. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a modest, long-sleeved shirt despite the warm September weather. She had good reasons for covering up, reasons that most people wouldn't understand. The community college hallways buzzed with the excitement of a new semester. Students chatted in groups, comparing schedules, and catching up on summer adventures. Sarah clutched her backpack's straps tighter and navigated through the crowd, looking for room 204 where her first class would begin. She had worked 3 jobs over the summer to save enough money for this moment, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her from getting her degree. As she found her classroom and took a seat in the back row, Sarah noticed a few students glancing her way. She was used to curious looks. At her age, she stood out among the 18 and 19-year-olds who made up most of the student body. What they didn't know was that Sarah had spent the last 5 years of her life in ways most of them couldn't imagine. "Good morning, everyone," said Professor Martinez as he entered the room. "Welcome to Introduction to Psychology. I know some of you are here because it's a required course, but I promise you'll find the human mind fascinating by the end of our semester together." Sarah opened her notebook and began taking careful notes. Education had always been important to her, but life had gotten in the way before she could pursue it properly. Now, finally, she had the chance to focus on her studies and build the future she'd always dreamed of. During the break between classes, Sarah made her way to the student cafeteria. The prices were reasonable, and she had budgeted carefully for meals on campus. As she stood in line with her tray, she overheard a conversation behind her. "Did you see that girl in our psych class?" whispered a voice. "She looks way too old to be here. I bet she's one of those people who couldn't make it in the real world and had to come back to school." Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes forward. She had heard worse comments than this, and she had learned to let them roll off her back. What mattered was her education, not what other people thought about her choices. She found an empty table and sat down with her simple lunch of sandwich and an apple. As she ate, she watched the other students laughing and socializing around her. Many of them seemed so young and carefree, worrying about things like weekend parties and dating drama. Sarah remembered being their age, but her life had taken a very different path. Her afternoon class was English composition, and as she walked across campus, the warm weather made her reconsider her clothing choice. The long sleeves were getting uncomfortable, but she wasn't ready to reveal what lay beneath them. Not yet, and maybe not ever in this environment. The English classroom was smaller and more intimate than her psychology class. Professor Chin seemed enthusiastic and energetic, immediately engaging the students in discussion about their writing goals and experiences. "I'd like everyone to introduce themselves and share one interesting thing about their background," Professor Chin announced. "This will help us get to know each other and understand the diverse perspectives you'll bring to your writing." Sarah's stomach dropped. She hated these introduction exercises. How could she possibly explain her background in a way that wouldn't invite questions or judgment? One by one, students shared their stories. Most talked about their hometowns, their majors, or their hobbies. A few mentioned part-time jobs or sports they played in high school. When it was Sarah's turn, all eyes turned to her. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she said quietly. "I'm 23, and I'm excited to be back in school after taking some time away to figure things out." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I enjoy reading and hope to major in social work someday." A girl named Ashley, who couldn't have been more than 18, raised her eyebrows. "What did you do during your time away? Did you work?" Sarah felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. "I had various jobs," she replied vaguely. "Nothing too exciting." After class, as students filed out, Sarah heard Ashley talking to her friend Emma. "She's so secretive. I bet she was in jail or something. Why else would someone that old be starting college now?" The words stung more than Sarah wanted to admit. She gathered her books quickly and headed for the exit, but not before she heard Emma's response. Maybe she just had a kid really young and is trying to get her life together now. Single moms do that sometimes. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pushed through the classroom door. Both guesses were wrong, but she couldn't blame them for speculating. She had been deliberately vague about her past, and young people naturally filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. The walk to her car was longer than usual as she took a detour through the quieter part of campus. She needed a moment to collect herself before facing the evening shift at her part-time job at the local diner. Working while going to school wasn't easy, but she had learned to manage difficult situations long before she'd arrived at Henderson Community College. As she sat in her car, Sarah rolled up her right sleeve and looked at the tattoo that covered most of her forearm. The black ink had faded slightly over the years, but the image remained clear and meaningful to her. It wasn't decorative or artistic like the tattoos many young people got these days. This tattoo told a story, her story, but it was one she wasn't ready to share with her new classmates. She rolled her sleeve back down and started the car. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she had faced worse things than gossip and speculation. Her education was too important to let other people's opinions derail her dreams. That evening at the diner, Sarah's coworker Janet noticed she seemed quieter than usual. Janet was in her 40s and had become something of a mentor to Sarah over the past 6 months they'd worked together. "First day of school get you down, honey?" Janet asked as they cleaned tables during a slow period. "Just adjusting," Sarah replied. "College students can be young." Janet laughed. "That's the point, isn't it? You're getting a fresh start. Don't let a bunch of kids make you feel bad about bettering yourself." "It's not that simple," Sarah said. "They look at me and see someone who doesn't belong. They make assumptions about why I'm there and what I've been doing with my life." "So tell them," Janet suggested. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of, Sarah. Your story might surprise them." Sarah shook her head. "They're not ready to hear my story, and I'm not ready to tell it." The conversation was interrupted by the dinner rush, but Janet's words stayed with Sarah throughout the evening. She had spent so long protecting herself and her past that she'd almost forgotten there might be another way to handle the situation. Later that night, as Sarah studied at her small kitchen table, she thought about her goals. She wanted to become a social worker to help other people who had experienced trauma and difficult transitions. But how could she help others if she couldn't even be honest about her own experiences? Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she saw it was from Ashley, her classmate from English composition. "Hey, Sarah. Got your number from the class contact sheet Professor Chin shared. A few of us are going to study together for our first essay assignment. Want to join us tomorrow at the library?" Ashley, Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to decline and continue keeping her distance from her classmates. But another part of her, the part that had always been brave and willing to face challenges head-on, knew that isolation wouldn't help her succeed in school. She typed back a simple response, "Sure." "What time?" The next morning, Sarah chose her outfit carefully. She wore her usual long sleeves, but she picked a lighter color and styled her hair differently. Maybe it was time to make more of an effort to connect with her classmates, even if she wasn't ready to share everything about herself. The study group met in a corner of the library where several tables were pushed together. Ashley was there with Emma and 2 other students from their class, Marcus and David. They all looked up as Sarah approached with her books. "Thanks for inviting me," Sarah said as she took an empty chair. "Of course," Ashley said brightly. "We're going to need all the help we can get with this essay assignment. Professor Chin seems like he's going to be tough." As they discussed the assignment, Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. Her classmates were focused on their work, and the conversation stayed on academic topics. She even contributed some insights that the others found helpful. "You're really good at analyzing literature," Marcus observed. "Have you studied this stuff before?" "I've always been a reader," Sarah replied honestly. "I had some time to read a lot of books over the past few years." "Lucky," Emma said. "I barely had time to read in high school with all my extracurriculars." The study session went well, and Sarah began to think that maybe she had been too quick to judge her classmates. They seemed genuinely interested in doing well in their courses, and they hadn't asked her any invasive personal questions. As they packed up their books, Ashley turned to Sarah. "This was really helpful. We should definitely do this again. Maybe we could meet at someone's place next time? The library gets so crowded." "You guys can meet at my apartment if you want," Emma offered. "My roommate won't mind, and we have a big dining table." Sarah hesitated. Meeting at someone's home felt more personal, more intimate. But she also recognized this as an opportunity to build the friendships she had been missing. "That sounds good," she said finally. "Great. How about Friday afternoon?" Ashley suggested. "We can work on the next assignment and maybe order pizza or something." As Sarah walked to her car after the study session, she felt a mix of hope and anxiety. She was making progress in connecting with her classmates, but she knew that closer friendships would eventually lead to more personal questions. The long sleeves she wore weren't just about covering her tattoo. They were about protecting the part of herself that she wasn't ready to explain. That afternoon, in her psychology class, Professor Martinez introduced a unit on trauma and resilience. As he explained how people cope with difficult experiences and rebuild their lives, Sarah found herself taking particularly detailed notes. Trauma affects everyone differently, Professor Martinez explained. But one of the most important factors in recovery is the support of community and the ability to find meaning in one's experiences. Sarah looked around a classroom and wondered how many of her fellow students had experienced real trauma in their lives. Most of them looked so sheltered and protected, as if their biggest challenges had been choosing which college to attend or which major to declare. But she also realized she might be making assumptions about them, just as they were making assumptions about her. Everyone carried invisible burdens, and everyone had a story that wasn't immediately apparent to others. After class, as she gathered her books, Sarah noticed that Ashley was approaching her. "Hey, I want to thank you for joining our study group yesterday," Ashley said. "Your insights really helped me understand the assignment better." "I'm glad I could help," Sarah replied. Ashley hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I also wanted to apologize if Emma and I seemed unwelcoming at first. We're not used to having classmates who are older, and I think we made some assumptions that weren't fair." Sarah was surprised by the apology. "You don't need to apologize. I know I'm different from most students here." "Different isn't bad," Ashley said quickly. "I've been thinking about what you said about reading a lot of books over the past few years, and I realized you probably have experiences that could teach the rest of us things. I hope you'll continue studying with us." As Ashley walked away, Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe there was hope for genuine connections with her classmates after all. That evening at the diner, Sarah found herself humming softly as she worked. Janet noticed her improved mood immediately. "Someone's feeling better today," Janet observed. "School going better?" "A little," Sarah admitted. "I joined a study group, and the students seem nicer than I initially thought." "That's wonderful, honey. You deserve to have friends and support while you're working toward your degree." As the evening wore on, Sarah thought about Ashley's apology and her comments about learning from Sarah's experiences. Maybe the time was coming when she would need to decide how much of her story she was willing to share. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with significance under her long sleeve. It represented the most important chapter of her life, the chapter that had shaped her into the person she was today. But it also represented a world that most college students couldn't understand, a world of sacrifice and service that seemed very far away from the concerns of homework assignments and social events. For now, she would continue to protect that part of herself. But she was beginning to realize that complete isolation wasn't the answer either. Somewhere between total secrecy and full disclosure, there might be a middle ground where she could build meaningful relationships while still honoring the privacy of her most sacred experiences. As she cleaned the last table of her shift, Sarah made a mental note to buy some shorter sleeve shirts for the weekend study session at Emma's apartment. It was time to take a small step toward letting her new friends see a little more of who she really was, even if they weren't ready to understand the full story yet. Friday afternoon arrived with unusually warm weather for early October. Sarah stood in front of her small closet, staring at the few short-sleeved shirts she owned. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for a simple blue t-shirt. After months of hiding behind long sleeves, the thought of exposing her arms felt both liberating and terrifying. She pulled the shirt over her head and looked at herself in the mirror. The tattoo on her right forearm was clearly visible now, a complex design in black ink that covered the area from her wrist to just below her elbow. To most people, it would look like military insignia, but they wouldn't understand its true meaning. Sarah took a deep breath and grabbed her backpack. She had promised herself she would take this small step toward openness, and she wasn't going to back down now. Emma's apartment was in a complex near campus, and Sarah could hear laughter coming from inside as she knocked on the door. Emma answered with a bright smile. "Sarah, come in. You're the last to arrive," Emma said, then paused as she noticed Sarah's outfit. Her eyes immediately went to the tattoo. "Oh, wow. I didn't know you had ink. That's really detailed." "Thanks," Sarah said simply, stepping into the apartment. The living room had been transformed into a study space, with textbooks and Notebooks spread across a large dining table. Ashley, Marcus, and David were already seated, snacks and drinks within easy reach. They all looked up as Sarah entered, and she saw their eyes immediately drawn to her exposed tattoo. "Holy shit," Marcus said, then quickly apologized. "Sorry, I mean, wow. That's some serious artwork." Ashley leaned forward, squinting at the design. "Is that military? It looks official." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't prepared herself for how exposed she would feel. "It's related to my previous work," she said carefully. "Were you in the military?" David asked with obvious curiosity. "My cousin is in the Army. He's always talking about wanting to get a tattoo when he gets out." The room fell silent as everyone waited for Sarah's response. She could feel their eyes on her, studying her face and trying to piece together the puzzle of her background. This was exactly what she had been trying to avoid. "I served for a few years," Sarah said finally. "That's why I'm older than most students. I got out and decided to pursue education." "That's so cool," Emma exclaimed. "I've never met a female veteran before." "What branch?" Sarah hesitated. She could give a simple answer and hope they would move on to their schoolwork. But something in their expressions, genuine interest rather than judgment, made her consider being slightly more open. "Navy," she said quietly. "Did you deploy anywhere?" Marcus asked. "My cousin went to Afghanistan twice." Sarah's hands began to shake slightly, and she clasped them together under the table. "I did deploy, but I'd rather not talk about the details, if that's okay. I'm here to focus on school now." Ashley seemed to sense Sarah's discomfort. "Of course. We should get started on this assignment anyway. Professor Chun is expecting some serious analysis." Sarah felt grateful for the subject change, but she noticed that her classmates kept glancing at her tattoo throughout the study session. She tried to focus on their discussion of the literary themes they were analyzing, but part of her mind was consumed with worry about what questions might come next. As they worked through their essays, Sarah found herself contributing more to the discussion than she had before. Her life experiences had given her a different perspective on themes of loss, sacrifice, and resilience that the authors were exploring. Her insights impressed her study partners, even though she couldn't explain where her understanding came from. "You really get the emotional depth of this story," Ashley observed. "It's like you've experienced some of these feelings yourself." Sarah nodded, but didn't elaborate. The truth was that she had experienced many of the emotions the authors described: fear, grief, brotherhood, purpose, but in ways that her young classmates couldn't imagine. After 2 hours of productive work, Emma suggested they take a break and order the pizza she had promised. As they waited for the delivery, the conversation naturally drifted away from their assignments. "So what was it like being in the Navy?" David asked. "Did you get to travel to cool places?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I went to some interesting places, but military travel isn't really like vacation travel. You're there to work, and the circumstances are usually pretty serious." "Were you on a ship?" Emma asked. "I get seasick just thinking about being on a boat for months." "I spent some time on ships, but I also worked on land in various locations," Sarah replied. She was trying to be honest without revealing too much about her specific role and experiences. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "I almost joined the Marines after high school, but my parents wanted me to go to college first. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like." "College is a good choice," Sarah said firmly. "Education opens doors that stay open for your whole life. Military service can be meaningful, but it's not for everyone." "Do you miss it?" Ashley asked. "The military, I mean." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She missed many things about her service: the sense of purpose, the brotherhood, the feeling that her work truly mattered. But she also carried scars from her time in service that her classmates couldn't see. "I miss some parts of it," she said finally. "But I'm exactly where I need to be right now." The pizza arrived, providing another distraction from the personal questions. As they ate, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: upcoming assignments, campus events, and their professors' quirks. Sarah began to relax again, grateful that her friends seemed to respect her boundaries about discussing her military service. After they finished eating and completed their work for the day, Sarah helped clean up while the others packed their books. As she was getting ready to leave, Ashley approached her privately. "Thank you for sharing about your service," Ashley said quietly. "I know that was probably hard to talk about. My grandfather was a veteran, and he never liked to discuss his experiences either." Sarah felt an unexpected emotion rising in her throat. "It's just complicated." There are some things that are hard to explain to people who haven't been there. I get it, Ashley said. Well, as much as I can without having experienced it myself. But I want you to know that we're glad you're here, and we respect whatever you've been through. As Sarah drove home that evening, she felt a complex mix of emotions. She had taken a significant step by revealing her military service, and her classmates had reacted better than she had feared. But she was also aware that she had only shared the surface of her story. The real details of her service, the missions she had participated in, the things she had seen and done, the reasons for her discharge, remained carefully hidden. Back at her apartment, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with her textbooks, but her mind kept wandering to the conversations from the afternoon. Her classmates' curiosity about her military service was natural and well-intentioned, but it also reminded her how different her life had been from theirs. At their age, she had been halfway around the world, carrying weapons and making life and death decisions. While they were attending high school proms and worrying about college applications, she was learning skills that most civilians would never need and seeing things that would stay with her forever. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma. "Thanks for coming today. Your insights on the readings were amazing. Can't wait for our next study session." Similar messages came in from Ashley, Marcus, and David. Their kindness and acceptance touched her, but it also made her feel guilty for not being completely honest about her background. That night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about her tattoo and what it represented. The design wasn't just decorative. It was a memorial, a reminder of people she had served with and events that had changed her life forever. Her classmates saw it as interesting artwork, but they had no idea that it represented some of the most significant and painful experiences of her life. The weekend passed quietly, with Sarah working extra shifts at the diner to save money for textbooks and school supplies. Janet noticed that Sarah seemed more thoughtful than usual. "How's school going, honey?" Janet asked during a break on Sunday evening. "It's good," Sarah replied. "I joined a study group, and I think I'm making some friends." "That's wonderful. You deserve to have people your age to spend time with." Sarah smiled, but she didn't correct Janet's assumption. Her classmates weren't really her age in terms of life experience, even though they were generous and welcoming. "I told them about my military service," Sarah said. "Just the basics, but it felt like a big step." Janet nodded approvingly. "Good for you. You have nothing to hide about your service to this country." "I know," Sarah said, "but there's so much they don't understand about what military service really involves. They think it's like what they see in movies." "Maybe that's okay for now," Janet suggested. "You don't have to tell them everything all at once. Let them get to know you as a person first." Monday morning brought a new week of classes and a small crisis. As Sarah walked across campus, she noticed several students pointing and whispering as she passed. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language made her uncomfortable. In her psychology class, she took her usual seat in the back row, but she noticed that more students than usual were looking in her direction. Professor Martinez began his lecture on stress and coping mechanisms, but Sarah found it difficult to concentrate. During the break, a student named Jake approached her. Jake was older than most of the other students, probably around 25, and Sarah had noticed him before because he often asked thoughtful questions in class. "Hey," Jake said, sitting down next to her. "I heard through the grapevine that you're a veteran. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Army, did 2 tours in Iraq." Sarah felt a wave of relief and recognition. "Navy, I did 3 deployments to various locations." Jake nodded knowingly. "How are you handling the transition to civilian college life?" "It's weird, right?" "Very weird," Sarah admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm from a different planet." "I get that. These kids are sweet, but they have no idea what the real world looks like," Jake said. "If you ever need someone to talk to who gets it, let me know. It helps to have someone around who speaks the same language." For the first time since starting college, Sarah felt like she had met someone who truly understood her background. Jake's offer of friendship meant more to her than he probably realized. After psychology class, Sarah headed to English composition, feeling more confident. Having connected with another veteran made her feel less alone on campus, even though she still wasn't ready to share the full details of her service with anyone. In English class, Professor Chin announced that they would be working on personal narrative essays for their next assignment. "I want you to write about a moment that changed your perspective on life," Professor Chin explained. "This should be a true story from your own experience, written with the literary techniques we've been studying." Sarah's stomach dropped. A personal narrative assignment was exactly what she had been dreading. How could she write about a life-changing moment without revealing things she wasn't ready to share? After class, Ashley caught up with her in the hallway. "This assignment seems perfect for you," Ashley said. "You must have tons of interesting stories from your military service." "I'm not sure I want to write about that," Sarah replied carefully. "Why not? I bet you have experiences that would make for amazing essays." Sarah struggled to find the right words. "Some experiences are too personal to share in an academic setting. I might write about something else." Ashley looked confused, but didn't push the issue. As they parted ways, Sarah realized that this assignment was going to force her to make some difficult decisions about how much of herself she was willing to reveal. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of her. She had always been a good writer, but this assignment felt impossible. Every significant moment that had changed her perspective was tied to her military service, and those experiences were too complex and painful to explain in a simple college essay. She thought about her deployments, the people she had worked with, the missions that had tested her in ways she was still trying to understand. She thought about the day her unit had come under fire, the night they had rescued civilians from a dangerous situation, and the moment she had realized that her service would leave permanent marks on her soul. But she also thought about her classmates reading her essay, trying to understand experiences that existed far outside their frame of reference. How could she explain the weight of carrying a weapon in hostile territory to people who worried about pop quizzes and social media drama? Sarah picked up her pen and began to write about a different kind of transformation, the moment she had decided to leave the military and pursue education. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a truth that she could share without exposing the deepest parts of her story. As she wrote, she thought about the conversation with Jake earlier that day. Maybe having another veteran on campus would make the rest of her college experience easier. Someone who understood the challenges of transitioning from military life to civilian education could be an invaluable ally. But she also knew that even among veterans, her specific experiences were unique. The tattoo on her arm represented a level of service and sacrifice that not all military members had experienced. Even Jake, with his Army background and combat deployments, might not fully understand the particular type of work she had done. Late that night, as Sarah finished the first draft of her essay, she made a decision. She would continue to share small pieces of her story with her classmates and professors, but she would protect the core of her military experience until she was certain that the people around her were ready to handle that level of truth. The tattoo on her arm would remain a mystery for now. Its true meaning known only to her, and to the few people who had served alongside her in places that most Americans would never see. But perhaps someday she would find people worthy of hearing the complete story of what that ink really represented. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah had first revealed her military background to her study group, and life at Henderson Community College had settled into a comfortable routine. Her friendships with Ashley, Emma, Marcus, and David had deepened, though she still kept many aspects of her past carefully guarded. The personal narrative essay she had written about transitioning to civilian life had earned praise from Professor Chun, but she had deliberately kept it vague about the specifics of her military service. On a crisp Monday morning in late October, Sarah arrived on campus to find an unusual buzz of activity. Colorful banners hung across the main walkway announcing Veterans Week, and tables were being set up for various events and displays. Sarah's stomach tightened as she realized the campus would be celebrating military service all week. "This is so cool," Emma said, catching up with Sarah near the main entrance. "Look at all these displays. I had no idea there were so many veterans on campus." Sarah nodded politely but felt increasingly uncomfortable as they walked past tables showing military memorabilia, recruitment information, and historical displays. While she appreciated the intention to honor veterans, she wasn't ready for this level of attention on military service. "Oh my gosh, Sarah!" Ashley appeared at her elbow, practically bouncing with excitement. "This week is going to be perfect for you. You should totally participate in some of these events." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus and David joined their group. David was reading from a flyer he had picked up. "They're having a panel discussion on Wednesday with local veterans talking about their experiences," David said. "Sarah, you should totally be on the panel. You could represent Navy veterans." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not really comfortable speaking publicly about my service." "Come on," Marcus encouraged. "You always have such interesting perspectives in class." I bet you have amazing stories to share. The group continued walking toward their first class, but Sarah could barely focus on their chatter about Veterans Week activities. She had come to college specifically to leave her military identity behind and focus on building a civilian future. Having her service thrust into the spotlight was the opposite of what she wanted. During psychology class, Professor Martinez announced that he would be giving extra credit to any students who attended Veterans Week events and wrote reflection papers about them. This is a great opportunity to learn about the experiences of people who have served our country, Professor Martinez explained. Many of you have probably never had in-depth conversations with veterans, so this week will broaden your perspectives on service and sacrifice. Sarah sank lower in her seat as she noticed several classmates glancing in her direction. Word about her military background had apparently spread beyond her immediate study group. After class, Jake approached her again. "How are you feeling about all this Veterans Week stuff?" he asked quietly. "Honestly, I hate it," Sarah admitted. "I didn't come to college to be treated like a curiosity or an educational exhibit." Jake nodded sympathetically. "I get that, but maybe there's an opportunity here. Sometimes sharing our stories with people who've never heard them can be meaningful, both for us and for them." Sarah shook her head. "There are parts of my story that aren't meant for college students to hear. Some experiences don't translate well to civilian audiences." "Fair enough," Jake said. "But remember, you control how much you share. You don't have to tell them everything." As Sarah walked to her next class, she thought about Jake's words. Maybe he was right that she could participate in Veterans Week activities without revealing the deeper aspects of her service. But she also knew that once she started sharing, people would want to know more. Wednesday arrived with the Veterans panel discussion that her friends had been encouraging her to attend. Sarah had managed to avoid signing up as a panelist, but her study group had insisted that she come to support the veterans who were speaking. The college auditorium was packed with students and community members. Sarah sat in the back row with her study group, hoping to remain inconspicuous. The panel consisted of 5 veterans from different branches and eras of service, including Jake and an older woman named Patricia who had served in the Air Force during the Gulf War. As the panelists shared their stories, Sarah found herself deeply moved by their honesty and vulnerability. They spoke about the challenges of deployment, the bonds formed with fellow service members, and the difficulties of transitioning back to civilian life. But their stories were also sanitized for the audience, focusing on themes of growth and patriotism without delving into the darker aspects of military service. During the question and answer session, a young student raised her hand. "What's the most important thing you want civilians to understand about military service?" the student asked. Patricia answered first. "I think it's important for people to understand that we're just regular people who chose to serve. We have the same hopes and dreams as everyone else." Jake nodded in agreement, and that military service affects everyone differently. Some people have positive experiences, others struggle with what they've seen and done. There's no single story that represents all veterans. As the panel concluded, Ashley turned to Sarah. "I wish you had been up there," she whispered. "You could have added so much to their discussion." Sarah felt a familiar knot in her stomach. Her experiences were vastly different from what the panelists had shared, and she wasn't sure her perspective would have been appropriate for this audience. After the event, the study group decided to attend a reception in the Student Center where attendees could mingle with the panelists and other veterans. Sarah reluctantly agreed to join them, though she planned to keep a low profile. The reception was crowded and loud, with students eagerly approaching veterans to ask questions and express their appreciation. Sarah stood near the edge of the room, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the interactions. "You look like you're trying to disappear," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a man in his 40s wearing a casual button-down shirt and khakis. He had the bearing of someone with military experience, though he wasn't wearing any obvious indicators of service. "Just observing," Sarah replied carefully. "I'm Tom Bradley," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm a counselor at the VA, and I was invited to speak with students about resources for veterans." "Sarah Mitchell," she replied, shaking his hand. "Are you a veteran yourself?" Tom asked. "You have the look of someone who's served." Sarah hesitated. She had learned to trust her instincts about people, and something about Tom's demeanor suggested he would understand her reservations. "Navy," she said quietly, "but I'm not really comfortable with events like this." Tom nodded knowingly. A lot of veterans struggle with the public attention, especially those who've had more intense experiences that don't translate well to civilian conversations. Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. Tom seemed to understand something that even Jake hadn't fully grasped. "What kind of work did you do in the Navy?" Tom asked gently. Sarah looked around the crowded room, then back at Tom. There was something in his eyes that suggested he already suspected her answer. "Special operations," she said quietly. "Maritime security and hostage rescue." Tom's expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "That's serious work. How long were you in?" 5 years. 3 deployments. Honorable discharge?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "Medical." Tom was quiet for a moment, processing her words. Medical discharges from special operations were usually related to either physical injuries or psychological trauma that made continued service impossible. "How are you doing with the transition?" Tom asked. "Civilian life can be challenging after that kind of work." "Some days are better than others," Sarah admitted. "College helps. It gives me something to focus on." "That's smart. Education is one of the best paths forward for veterans with your background." Tom pulled a business card from his pocket. "If you ever want to talk with someone who understands what you've been through, give me a call. I work with a lot of special operations veterans." Sarah took the card and slipped it into her pocket. For the first time since Veterans Week had begun, she felt like someone truly understood her situation. Their conversation was interrupted by Ashley's voice calling her name across the room. "Sarah, come meet someone." Sarah turned to see Ashley approaching with an older man in a military dress uniform. Her heart rate immediately spiked as she recognized the insignia of a Navy captain. "Sarah, this is Captain Morrison," Ashley said proudly. "He's the guest speaker for tomorrow's ceremony." "Captain Morrison, this is my friend Sarah who served in the Navy." Captain Morrison extended his hand with a professional smile. "Pleased to meet you, Sarah. What was your rate in the Navy?" Sarah felt all eyes on her as students nearby turned to listen to the conversation. This was exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid. "I was a naval special warfare operator," she said quietly, hoping to end the conversation quickly. Captain Morrison's expression immediately changed. His casual smile disappeared, replaced by something much more serious and respectful. "Special warfare," he repeated quietly. "What unit?" Sarah felt trapped. Ashley and several other students were listening intently, clearly curious about what the captain's reaction meant. "SEAL Team 6, she said, barely above a whisper. The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Captain Morrison straightened to attention and rendered a sharp salute, which Sarah automatically returned despite being in civilian clothes. "Ma'am," Captain Morrison said with deep respect in his voice, "it's an honor to meet you." The small group of students around them fell completely silent. Ashley's mouth was literally hanging open, and Emma looked like she was trying to process what she had just witnessed. "I apologize," Captain Morrison continued. "I had no idea we had an operator in attendance. Your service record must be extraordinary." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as more people in the reception began to notice the commotion. Students were whispering and pointing, trying to understand why a Navy captain was saluting their classmate. "Thank you, sir," Sarah said quietly. "But I prefer to keep a low profile." Captain Morrison nodded immediately. "Of course. But please know that your presence at this institution honors us all." As the captain moved away to continue his conversations with other attendees, Sarah found herself surrounded by her study group and several other students, all staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to confusion. "What the hell just happened?" Marcus asked. "Why did he salute you like that?" Sarah felt like the walls of the room were closing in on her. This was her worst nightmare, being put on display in front of people who couldn't possibly understand the reality of her experiences. "I need some air," she said, pushing through the crowd toward the exit. Ashley followed her outside into the cool evening air. "Sarah, wait. What was that about? What's SEAL Team 6? Sarah stopped walking and turned to face her friend. Ashley's expression was full of genuine concern and curiosity, without any trace of judgment or mockery. "It's a special operations unit," Sarah said carefully. "We did difficult missions." "Like what kind of missions?" Ashley asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "The kind that don't get talked about publicly. The kind that most people are better off not knowing about." Ashley seemed to sense the gravity in Sarah's voice. "Is that why you don't like talking about your service? Because you can't tell us what you actually did?" "Partly," Sarah admitted. "But it's also because the work I did changes you. is not something that fits neatly into civilian conversations about patriotism and service. Back inside the reception, Sarah could see students talking animatedly, clearly discussing what they had witnessed. She knew that by tomorrow, everyone on campus would know that the quiet older student in their classes was apparently some kind of elite special forces veteran. "I should go home," Sarah said. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." "Sarah, wait," Ashley said. "I know this is overwhelming, but maybe it's not entirely bad. People respect you for your service." "They respect the idea of my service," Sarah corrected. "They have no idea what it actually involved." As Sarah walked to her car, she thought about Captain Morrison's reaction and what it meant. His immediate salute and change in demeanor indicated that he understood the significance of SEAL Team 6 in ways that the students couldn't. But it also meant that her carefully maintained anonymity was now completely shattered. She sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine, trying to prepare herself for what the next few days would bring. There would be questions she couldn't answer, attention she didn't want, and expectations she couldn't meet. But as she drove home, Sarah also thought about Tom Bradley's offer to talk with someone who understood her background. Maybe it was time to stop carrying the weight of her experiences entirely alone. The tattoo on her arm suddenly felt heavier than usual, as if the public revelation of her identity had somehow made it more significant. Tomorrow, she would have to face her classmates and professors with her secret finally exposed. The question was whether she would be able to maintain any privacy about the darker aspects of her service, or if the curiosity unleashed tonight would eventually force her to reveal more than she was ready to share. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed the moment when Captain Morrison had saluted her in front of her classmates. By morning, she felt exhausted and dreaded facing campus. She considered skipping classes entirely, but her commitment to her education was stronger than her desire to hide. She arrived at college early, hoping to avoid crowds, but the campus was already buzzing with activity. As she walked toward her first class, she noticed students looking at her differently, some with obvious curiosity, others with something approaching awe. Word had clearly spread about the events at the Veterans Week reception. In psychology class, Sarah took her usual seat in the back row, but she could feel eyes on her throughout Professor Martinez's lecture. During the break, several students approached her with questions. "Is it true you were in some elite Navy unit?" asked a girl named Kelly whom Sarah had barely spoken to before. "Were you like a Navy SEAL?" another student pressed. Sarah felt cornered. "I'd rather not discuss it," she said quietly, but the students seemed to interpret her reluctance as modesty rather than a genuine desire for privacy. When class resumed, Professor Martinez made an announcement that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "I want to acknowledge that we have someone very special in our class," Professor Martinez said, looking directly at Sarah. "Sarah Mitchell served in one of our military's most elite units, and we're honored to have her perspective in our discussions of trauma and resilience." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as every student in the room turned to stare at her. This was exactly what she had feared, being singled out and treated as a living example rather than just another student. After class, Jake approached her in the hallway. "Rough morning?" he asked sympathetically. "You could say that," Sarah replied. "I feel like I'm in a fishbowl." "It'll die down," Jake assured her. "College students have short attention spans. They'll find something else to focus on soon." But Sarah wasn't convinced. As she walked across campus to her next class, she noticed more stares and whispered conversations. Some students seemed to view her with newfound respect, while others looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, as if they weren't sure how to interact with someone who had done things they couldn't imagine. In English composition, Professor Chun asked to speak with her after class. When the room cleared, he approached her with a serious expression. "Sarah, I heard about what happened at the Veterans Week reception," Professor Chun said. "I want you to know that you don't have to feel pressured to share more about your experiences than you're comfortable with." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you. I'm worried that people expect me to be some kind of spokesperson for military service, and that's not why I'm here." "I understand completely," Professor Chin said. "However, I do want to mention something. Your personal narrative essay about transitioning to civilian life was exceptional, but I sense you were holding back significant details. If you ever feel ready to write about your actual military experiences, I think it could be powerful not just for you, but for readers who need to understand what veterans go through." "I'm not ready for that," Sarah said firmly. "Of course not. But when you are ready, I'd be honored to help you craft that story. As Sarah left the English building, she found Ashley waiting for her outside. I've been looking for you everywhere, Ashley said. I wanted to apologize for last night. I didn't realize that introducing you to Captain Morrison would put you in an uncomfortable position. Sarah felt touched by Ashley's concern. You couldn't have known. You were just trying to be supportive. Can I ask you something? Ashley said hesitantly. And please don't feel like you have to answer. Sarah nodded, bracing herself. When you were in the military, did you have to do dangerous things? Like life or death dangerous? Sarah looked at her young friend and saw genuine care in her expression, not just curiosity. Yes, she said quietly. I did dangerous things, and I saw things that most people will never see. That's why I don't talk about it much. Ashley was quiet for a moment. I can't imagine being responsible for that kind of stuff at your age. You were younger than I am now when you were doing that work. It changes you, Sarah said simply. You grow up fast when you're in situations like that. As they walked together toward the student center, Ashley spoke thoughtfully. I've been thinking about something. Yesterday, before we knew about your special ops background, we were all treating you like you were just this older student who'd had some vague military experience. But you're actually someone who's done things that matter on a national level, aren't you? Sarah felt uncomfortable with Ashley's characterization. I was part of a team. Individual recognition isn't really how it works in special operations. But still, Ashley persisted. You must have stories that are incredible. And here we were worried about quiz grades and social drama, while you're sitting there having actually saved lives or stopped bad guys or whatever it is you did. Different experiences don't make one person more important than another, Sarah said carefully. Your concerns and goals are just as valid as anyone else's. They reached the student center, where the Veterans Week displays were still prominent. Sarah noticed that several students pointed at her as they walked past the military memorabilia exhibits. Sarah, Marcus called out, approaching with David and Emma. We've been looking for you. Everyone's talking about last night. What exactly are they saying? Sarah asked with resignation. That you're some kind of badass special forces operative, David said with obvious excitement. Is it true you can't talk about your missions because they're classified? Sarah felt overwhelmed by their enthusiasm. Some information is classified, yes. But most I don't talk about my experiences because they're personal and complicated. Emma leaned forward eagerly. But you could probably disarm someone with your bare hands, right? Sarah closed her eyes briefly. This was exactly what she had feared. Her classmates reducing her military experience to action movie stereotypes. Real combat isn't like what you see in movies, Sarah said firmly. It's traumatic and complex, and the skills we learned were for protecting people, not for showing off. Marcus seemed to sense her discomfort. Sorry, we don't mean to bombard you with questions. It's just really cool to know someone who's done that kind of work. I appreciate your interest, Sarah said, but I hope you can understand that I came to college to be a student, not to be defined by my military service. As the group dispersed to their respective classes, Sarah felt more isolated than ever. Her classmates meant well, but their excitement about her background made her feel like a curiosity rather than a friend. That afternoon, Sarah had planned to work on assignments in the library, but she found it impossible to concentrate with students constantly approaching her with questions about her military service. Finally, she gathered her books and headed to her car, deciding to study at home instead. As she walked across the parking lot, she was surprised to see Captain Morrison approaching her. He was now in civilian clothes, but his military bearing was unmistakable. Ms. Mitchell, Captain Morrison said respectfully, I hope you don't mind me approaching you. I wanted to speak with you privately. Sarah felt apprehensive, but nodded. Of course, sir. First, I want to apologize for yesterday evening, Captain Morrison said. I realized after our encounter that my reaction may have drawn unwanted attention to you. That wasn't my intention. I appreciate that, sir, Sarah replied. Captain Morrison looked around the parking lot to ensure they weren't being overheard, then continued. I spent some time last night looking into SEAL Team 6 operations from the time frame when you would have served. I have clearance to access some mission reports, and I wanted to understand what you might have experienced. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Sir, I'm not sure. Captain Morrison held up his hand gently. I'm not asking for details about classified operations, but I did review some general information about Team 6 deployments during your service period, and I want you to know that I understand why you might be reluctant to discuss your experiences. Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and anxiety. Having a senior officer acknowledge the nature of her service felt validating, but it also made her feel more exposed. "The reason I wanted to speak with you," Captain Morrison continued, "is that I think you might benefit from connecting with other Team 6 veterans who are further along in their civilian transitions. I know several former operators who found meaningful second careers while processing their military experiences in healthy ways." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," Sarah said honestly. "I understand. But when you're ready, I'd be happy to make some introductions." The transition from elite special operations to civilian life is particularly challenging, and it helps to have mentors who've walked that path successfully. Captain Morrison handed her another business card. "My contact information. No pressure, but if you ever want to talk with someone who understands the weight of what you've carried, please reach out." After Captain Morrison left, Sarah sat in her car for several minutes, thinking about his offer. Part of her was drawn to the idea of connecting with other Team 6 veterans who might truly understand her experiences. But another part of her was still committed to leaving her military identity behind and building an entirely civilian future. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tom Bradley, the VA counselor she had met the previous night. "Hi, Sarah. I hope yesterday's events weren't too overwhelming. My offer to talk still stands whenever you're ready." Sarah stared at the message, realizing that for the first time since leaving the military, she had two different people offering support who might actually understand her background. The isolation she had felt for so long was beginning to crack. That evening at the diner, Janet immediately noticed Sarah's subdued mood. "Rough day at school?" Janet asked during a quiet moment. "My military background became public knowledge," Sarah explained. "Now everyone wants to know details about my service that I'm not ready to share." "Ah," Janet said knowingly. "That's tough. People mean well, but they don't always understand boundaries. The worst part is that they have these romantic ideas about what military service is like. They think it's all heroics and adventure stories." Janet nodded sympathetically. "Reality is usually more complicated than people want to hear." As Sarah worked her shift, she thought about Professor Chen's suggestion that she write about her actual military experiences. Maybe there was value in telling her story, not for the entertainment of curious college students, but as a way of processing her own experiences and helping other veterans who might be struggling with similar transitions. Late that night, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of her. Instead of working on her assigned homework, she began writing about a mission that had changed her perspective on life and death. For the first time, she wrote without censoring herself or worrying about her audience's ability to understand. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she allowed herself to remember details she had been suppressing. She wrote about the weight of her equipment, the sound of helicopters, the faces of the people she had been sent to rescue. She wrote about split-second decisions that affected other people's lives and about the burden of carrying classified information that she could never share. As dawn approached, Sarah had filled several pages with the most honest writing she had done since leaving the military. She wasn't ready to show it to anyone, but the act of putting her experiences into words felt therapeutic in a way she hadn't expected. The tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with significance as she read through what she had written. For the first time, she had begun to articulate what that ink really represented. Not just her military service, but a specific mission that had tested her in ways that still affected her daily life. Maybe it was time to stop running from her past and start finding ways to integrate her military experiences with her civilian future. The question was whether she could do that, while maintaining the boundaries she needed to protect herself from people who weren't ready to understand the full weight of what she had experienced. 2 weeks had passed since Captain Morrison's salute had revealed Sarah's background to the entire campus. The initial buzz of excitement from her classmates had indeed died down somewhat, as Jake had predicted, but Sarah found herself at a crossroads. The pages she had written about her actual military experiences sat in a folder on her kitchen table, and she found herself reading them repeatedly. On a gray November morning, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked into Professor Chen's office during his posted hours and placed the folder on his desk. "I wrote about a real mission," she said without preamble. "I don't know if it's any good as writing, but it's the truth about what my service was actually like." Professor Chen looked up from the papers he was grading, his expression immediately becoming more focused. "Are you sure you want me to read this?" "I'm not sure about anything," Sarah admitted. "But you said that when I was ready to write about my actual experiences, it might be powerful. I need to know if you think this has any value, or if it's just me working through my own issues." Professor Chen carefully opened the folder and began reading. Sarah watched his face as his eyes moved across the pages. She saw his expression change from professional interest to something deeper, concern, respect, and what might have been recognition of the weight of what she had written. After 20 minutes of silent reading, Professor Chen looked up at her with a grave expression. "Sarah," he said quietly, "this is extraordinary writing. But more than that, it's an extraordinary account of an experience that most people will never understand. Are you prepared for the reactions this might generate if you choose to share it more widely?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I wrote it because I needed to get it out of my head. But I also keep thinking about other veterans who might be struggling with similar experiences. Maybe sharing this could help someone else feel less alone." Professor Chen leaned back in his chair, clearly choosing his words carefully. "What you've written here is a first-hand account of a hostage rescue mission in Somalia. You've described making life and death decisions under extreme pressure, losing a team member, and living with the knowledge that your actions directly affected whether civilians lived or died." Sarah nodded, feeling exposed, but also relieved that he understood the significance of what she had shared. "This isn't typical college writing," Professor Chen continued. "This is testimony. It's a historical record of events that shaped international policy, written by someone who was actually there. If you're serious about sharing this, we need to think carefully about how and where." "What do you mean?" "I mean that this could be published in military journals, veterans publications, or even mainstream magazines that focus on first-hand accounts of military operations. But you need to be prepared for the scrutiny that would come with that level of exposure." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. She had written the piece to process her own experiences, but the idea of it being read by strangers across the country was daunting. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Of course. But, Sarah, you should know that this kind of writing, honest, detailed accounts of special operations, is rare and valuable. Most operators never share these stories publicly." As Sarah left Professor Chen's office, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride that her writing was being taken seriously, anxiety about the potential consequences of sharing her story publicly, and a strange sense of relief that someone finally understood the full scope of what she had experienced. That afternoon, she decided to take Captain Morrison up on his offer to connect with other Team 6 veterans. She called the number on his business card and left a message explaining that she was ready to speak with someone who had successfully transitioned to civilian life. Captain Morrison called her back within hours and arranged a meeting for the following day at a coffee shop near campus. He explained that he would be bringing Commander James Rodriguez, a former Team 6 operator who now worked as a trauma counselor specifically for special operations veterans. Sarah spent the evening preparing herself mentally for the conversation. She had avoided connecting with other Team 6 veterans since her discharge, partly because she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit those experiences, and partly because she feared they would judge her for the circumstances of her medical discharge. The next day, Sarah arrived at the coffee shop early and chose a table in a quiet corner. Captain Morrison arrived promptly at the scheduled time, accompanied by a man in his early 40s who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of special operations experience. "Sarah, this is Commander Rodriguez," Captain Morrison said as they sat down. He served with Team 6 for 8 years and has been working in veteran mental health for the past 5. Commander Rodriguez extended his hand with a genuine smile. "Call me James, and thank you for being willing to meet. It takes courage to reach out." As Captain Morrison excused himself to give them privacy, James ordered coffee and settled into his chair. "So, tell me about your transition. How long have you been out?" "About 18 months, Sarah replied. "I got out on medical, and I've been struggling with integrating my experiences with civilian life." James nodded knowingly. Medical discharge can be particularly challenging because it often feels like your career was cut short rather than concluding naturally. "What kind of work are you doing now?" Sarah explained her decision to pursue education and her goals of becoming a social worker. As she talked, she found herself sharing details about her college experience and her struggle to maintain boundaries around her military service. "The hardest part," Sarah said, "is that people either want to treat me like a hero or they want dramatic stories about missions. But the reality of what we did is too complex for those simple narratives." "That's exactly why I do the work I do now," James said. "Civilians often can't hold space for the full complexity of special operations experiences. They want either inspiration or entertainment, but they're not prepared for the psychological reality of what we've seen and done." "How do you deal with that?" I've learned to compartmentalize my audiences, James explained. I share different levels of detail with different people, depending on their ability to handle it and their need to know. My wife knows everything. My children know basic facts. My civilian friends know general themes. And my professional colleagues know whatever is relevant to helping other veterans. Sarah felt a sense of recognition. I've been trying to figure out how to do exactly that. James leaned forward slightly. Captain Morrison mentioned that you've written about some of your experiences. That's a significant step. Writing can be incredibly therapeutic for operators, but it can also be a way to help other veterans feel less isolated. My professor thinks it could be published, Sarah said hesitantly, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of exposure. What specifically worries you about publication? Sarah considered the question. I'm afraid that people will sensationalize it, or that they'll focus on the dramatic elements and miss the human cost. I'm also worried about my former teammates' privacy. Those are valid concerns, James said, but they're also manageable if you work with editors who understand military culture and if you're clear about your boundaries. You could publish under a pseudonym, change identifying details, or focus on your personal emotional journey rather than operational specifics. They talked for 2 more hours, covering everything from nightmares and hypervigilance to the challenge of forming civilian relationships when your experiences are largely unknowable to others. For the first time since her discharge, Sarah felt like she was talking with someone who truly understood the specific challenges of transitioning from elite special operations to civilian life. As they prepared to leave, James handed her a business card for a support group he facilitated specifically for female special operations veterans. We meet once a month, James explained. It's a small group, only about 8 women, but they all have similar backgrounds and struggles. You might find it helpful to talk with others who've walked this path. That evening, Sarah called Tom Bradley, the VA counselor she had met during Veterans Week. She explained that she was ready to explore counseling and that she had been referred by James Rodriguez. James is excellent, Tom said. He understands the unique challenges of Team 6 transitions better than almost anyone. How are you feeling about taking this step? Scared but ready, Sarah admitted. I've been isolating myself for too long. That's a common pattern for operators. The skills that keep you alive in hostile environments can become barriers to connection in civilian settings. They scheduled an appointment for the following week, and Tom explained that he would help her develop strategies for managing her symptoms while building a sustainable civilian life. The next day on campus, Sarah noticed that her interactions with classmates felt different. She was still protective of her privacy, but she felt less defensive and more capable of setting appropriate boundaries. During their regular study group meeting, Ashley broached the topic that had been on everyone's mind. Sarah, we've all been wanting to ask, how are you handling all the attention from your military background becoming public knowledge? Sarah looked around the table at her friends, Ashley, Emma, Marcus, and David, and realized that their curiosity came from genuine care rather than mere fascination. It's been challenging, Sarah said honestly. I came to college to focus on my future, not to be defined by my past. But I'm learning that completely separating those 2 parts of my life isn't healthy either. Is there anything we can do to make it easier? Emma asked. Like, are there questions we should avoid or ways we can support you better? Sarah felt touched by Emma's thoughtfulness. Just remember that I'm still the same person it was before you knew about my military background. My experiences shaped me, but they don't define everything about who I am now. Marcus nodded. We get that. And we want you to know that we respect whatever boundaries you need around talking about your service. As they continued their study session, Sarah felt a shift in the group dynamic. Her friends were still curious about her background, but they seemed more focused on supporting her as a student and friend rather than trying to extract dramatic stories from her. That weekend, Sarah made 2 important decisions. First, she attended James Rodriguez's support group for female special operations veterans. The meeting was held in a private room at the VA facility, and as Sarah walked in, she was struck by the immediate sense of recognition she felt with the other women present. These women carried themselves differently from her college classmates. They had the same alert awareness, the same efficient movements, and the same guarded expressions that Sarah recognized in herself. But they also seemed more at peace than she felt, as if they had found ways to integrate their military experiences with their civilian lives. During the meeting, Sarah listened as the women shared updates about their week. Challenges with nightmares, successes in their civilian careers, struggles with relationships, and victories in their healing journeys. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah found herself sharing more openly than she had with anyone since her discharge. "I've been trying to hide from my military experiences," she said. "But recently they've become public knowledge at my college, and I'm realizing that complete avoidance isn't working for me." An older woman named Maria, who had served with Team 6 for 6 years, nodded knowingly. "I tried that approach for 3 years after I got out. It just made me feel more isolated and angry." "What changed?" Sarah asked. "I realized that my experiences, even the difficult ones, are part of what makes me valuable in my civilian work. I'm a police detective now, and my military background helps me understand complex situations and make decisions under pressure." Another woman, Lisa, who now worked as a nurse, added, "I also started sharing my story in controlled ways, writing for veterans publications, speaking at military conferences. It helped me process my experiences while also contributing to conversations about women in special operations." Sarah's second decision was to give Professor Chin permission to submit her written account to a military journal for publication consideration. She would use a pseudonym and change identifying details, but she wanted to contribute to the limited literature about Team 6 experiences, particularly from the perspective of female operators. "I think this could help other veterans," she told Professor Chun during their follow-up meeting, "and I think it might help me move forward in my own healing process." Professor Chin smiled. "I think you're making a brave and important choice. This kind of authentic writing about military experiences is rare and valuable." As the semester neared its end, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her college experience had changed since that first day when she had hidden behind long sleeves and vague answers about her background. She was still protective of her privacy and selective about what she shared with whom, but she no longer felt like she was living in complete isolation from her own experiences. The tattoo on her arm no longer felt like a secret she had to hide. During a recent study session, David had asked about its significance, and Sarah had been able to give him an honest answer. "It's a memorial for my team members and a reminder of missions that changed my life. The specific details are personal, but it represents the most meaningful work I've ever done." Her classmates had accepted that explanation without pushing for more details, and Sarah realized that people were generally more respectful of boundaries than she had feared. As she prepared for final exams, Sarah also prepared for the next phase of her civilian transition. She would continue her education with a clearer sense of how her military experiences could inform her future work in social services. She would maintain her connection with the support group and her counseling sessions with Tom Bradley, and she would wait to see if her written account would be published, potentially helping other veterans feel less alone in their own transitions. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that healing didn't require forgetting or hiding from her past. Instead, it meant finding ways to honor her experiences while building a meaningful future. The young woman who had walked onto Henderson Community College campus, trying to invisible, had evolved into someone who could stand proudly in both her military and civilian identities. The mocking voices she had feared from her classmates had never materialized. Instead, she had found respect, support, and genuine friendship from people who might not fully understand her experiences, but who cared about her as a person. And in connecting with other veterans who shared similar backgrounds, she had begun to rebuild the sense of brotherhood and purpose that she had missed since leaving the military. As Sarah packed up her books on the last day of the semester, Ashley approached her with a small wrapped package. "This is from all of us," Ashley said, indicating their study group. "We wanted you to have something to remember your first semester by." Sarah unwrapped the package to find a framed photo of their group taken during one of their study sessions, along with a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for trusting us with your friendship and for showing us what real courage looks like. We're proud to know you." Looking at the photo, Sarah realized that she had achieved something she hadn't thought possible when she first enrolled in college. She had built genuine friendships while maintaining her dignity and privacy. She had found ways to honor her military service without being trapped by it, and she had begun to envision a future where all parts of her identity could coexist. The tattoo on her arm would always carry the weight of her experiences, but it no longer felt like a burden she had to bear alone. It was part of her story, and she was finally learning how to tell that story in ways that honored both her past service and her future dreams.